Disclaimer: all the story and images/graphics used in the video belong to their respective owners. I or this channel do not claim any rights over them, all credits to the respected owner. Chapter 51: Get a Floor for Free. Jack's words caused the two ladies to raise their brows. Celine looked at his with a smile that had a hint of teasing. She asked, "Between the two of us, who would you like to be in your car?" Jack hadn't seen that question coming at all. Now that he was asked, he thought to himself, "Ain't it obvious? I came here to pick you up. So, I would want you to be in my car." But he didn't say that out loud. He had interacted with several girls previously. Although none of the interaction was romantic or such, he at least knew something basic. If he chose Celine, he was sure that Faith would be offended. If he chose Faith, Celine would be offended. If he chose none of them, he was sure that both of them would be offended. Such a situation needed serious consideration. On the other hand, Faith was looking at Celine weirdly. She thought to herself, "Since when did this young lady start teasing men?" Then, she looked at Jack with squinted eyes. "These two must be trying to play me here. They must have known each other a long time ago but are trying to fool me here." After a few seconds of consideration, Jack came to an appropriate decision. "Can your car accommodate 4 people at the same time?" he asked while looking at Celine. "Not really. Just like yours, mine can only carry 2 people. It's a sports car," Celine replied as her smile became wider. She wanted to see how Jack's thinking process was. Although she was thinking on this way, in her heart, she wanted him to choose her. "Since we're both heading to the same destination, and our cars can only accommodate 2 people, let's take a cab. It can carry all of us," Jack said. Celine and Faith went agape the moment that they heard Jack's solution. They had thought that he would be forced to pick one of them or none now that neither his nor Celine's car couldn't carry them both. Who would have thought that Jack would suggest that they leave their cars here and take a cab instead? They were both amazed, but at the same time, Celine had some grievance in her heart. "Can't you just pick me?" After a moment of silence, Celine waved her hand and said, "There's no need for a cab. Faith is still going to the new company to do something. So, there's no need to take a cab. I'll just take your car while Faith takes mine." It was also at this moment that Jack noticed that she was teasing him. He then thought to himself that he must return this debt. How could he, a man, accept someone to tease him easily? Faith didn't have a disagreement at all. Although she had some doubts about the two, Jack's answer had made her to be at ease with him. If he had instantly decided on taking Celine with him, she would have a bad impression of him. They both left the hotel in the 2 cars. Jack was driving while Celine was on the passenger seat. He didn't put on any stunts while driving this time. On the way, they talked about this and that, getting familiar with each other. Not long after, they arrived at the business overlord building. Celine wasn't expecting that Jack's new business would be located here. Although she'd seen taller than this, when you see a taller dwarf, you will be surprised, right? After parking the car, he saw that Tim had already arrived. It seemed that he'd never forgotten this car that was owned by Jack. The moment that the duo got out of the car, he stepped forward and greeted. "Morning, boss, madam." The moment that Tim called Celine madam, Celine blushed. After all, the way that Tim had referred to her was the same as calling her as Jack's girlfriend or maybe wife. "Hey, I'm not his wife. We've only met a few times and we began talking yesterday." Celine wanted to shout out these words, but for some reason, she held back while looking at Jack. Jack, on the other hand, didn't say a word and just nodded at Tim. "Morning, on what floor is Chris and the others?" Jack asked. "They are on the 7th floor. Tim replied. "I got it, thanks," Jack said to Tim before turning to Celine and said, "Let's go." Celine was wondering what Jack was thinking by not clarifying the fact that they had no such of relationship that Tim was thinking. But what made her frown a little was the fact that Jack didn't know what floor the meeting was located. "You don't know what floor your office is located?" She couldn't help but ask. I just told them to pick a floor and set up an office there. Today is when the grocery department will start running by management centralization. Jack said. Pick a floor? Are they free? Why didn't I know about that? If I did, I surely would have brought my friend's company here. Celine said with a sad look on her face. For some reason, Jack smiled and said, You can choose one too. They're free. Are you kidding me? If it was free, then there would be many people picking their own floors. Celine asked. Well, why don't you try it? There's a person in charge of the building on the ground floor. Or, you can ask the receptionist. Jack stated. Celine looked at Jack suspiciously. She couldn't accept this fact that there was someone who would spend his own money to build an office building only to give it out for free. Without a word, they arrived on the ground floor. This floor had been set up in such a way that it was a reception area and a lobby. This was the renovation that Sabrina had arranged after Jack made the request. There was nothing much to do. It was just placing the receptionist desk as well as the couches for the guests in waiting. After getting to the front desk, Jack looked at Celine and gave her a go-ahead. At the same time, he sent a message to Chris to come down. Although he had bought this building, the new employees here didn't know him. A good example would be the gentleman working as a receptionist. After sending the text, he turned his attention to the conversation between the two. Are you serious, miss? How can this building be free? This building has already been bought and isn't in the market. Even if it was, there's nobody that would offer such a building for free, right? The man said with a frown on his face. Since the building had only the ones in charge of cleaning and security, but was almost empty. On this ground floor, there was only the receptionist and a security guard. Are you sure about that? I've been told by someone that it is free. Celine said as she squinted her eyes at Jack. On seeing her expression, Jack felt like laughing out loud, but in the end, he suppressed his laughter and just smiled. Upon seeing this, Celine knew that she had been duped. Her face blushed in both shame and embarrassment. At this moment, she felt some resentment towards Jack. The reason behind this was due to him making a fool out of her. Jack, how dare you lie to me? Celine asked angrily as she stumped her foot onto the ground. Noticing that he seemed to have gone a little far, Jack could only smile and say, I'm sorry about that. But, that's a comeback for teasing me back in the hotel. Celine took deep breaths as she tried to contain her anger. This was the first time that a person had made a fool out of her. But, in the end, she didn't know why she couldn't slap that smiling face of his. But it's true that you can get a floor here for free. Do you want it? Jack asked. Humph. Whom are you trying to tease again? I'm not that gullible to fall for the same trick twice. Celine said as she turned her face away from him. I'm serious this time. I'm not lying. Jack said seriously. Celine looked at his serious expression for a moment before shifting her gaze towards the receptionist. The receptionist, although he was kind and easygoing to those that visited the building, he couldn't take it anymore when he saw that Jack kept on saying that the building was offering a floor for free. Who does he think he is? Does he think that he can joke around with other people's property? The receptionist thought to himself. Sir, I don't think that it's appropriate for you to start lying to others about serious things. You know you can be sued for fraud. He stated with a serious expression on his face. According to what he could think of, Jack was here with the intention of pleasing this girl. It seemed that he wanted her to be his girl, and that was why he was formulating lies. Jack looked at the receptionist but didn't reply. He just looked at Celine, waiting for her decision. This was his building and he could make a decision to give out floors for free. But, currently, the only thing that he needed was to know that she was serious about moving her company here. Celine didn't know what to do. The receptionist said that there were no free floors, while on the other hand, Jack seemed serious about what he was saying. Just as she was about to reply, the elevator opened and a middle-aged man in a black suit rushed out of it. The moment that he saw Jack, he rushed towards him. Mr. Jack, you've already arrived? Chris said as soon as he arrived in front of Jack. Chapter 52, Flyers Bank again. Jack had said that he would be here at about 10:40. Who would have known that Jack would be here by 10, over 40 minutes earlier? But it wasn't like there was a problem. Everything was already in position. Unexpectedly, I arrived earlier, Jack replied. He then turned towards Celine and said, "If you want a floor here, just tell me which one it is as long as it's not among the top 5. Although he could agree to give her a floor as a sign of friendship, there was a limit to how much he could do. There was no way that he could offer the whole building to show his sincerity, right? So, for now, he could only offer her a single floor. There was no way that he would allow the building that was going to be his enterprise's headquarters to have several other companies that are not subsidiaries under his enterprise. And all the subsidiary companies under him had to be fully owned by his enterprise. Although Celine still had some doubts about what Jack was saying, upon seeing that Chris didn't seem to disagree, she tended to believe him. At this time, the receptionist looked at Chris and said, "Mr. Chris, this sir here is claiming that we're giving free floors here. Can you please let him know that there are no free floors here?" Chris was surprised for a moment before he hurriedly said to Jack, "Mr. Jack, I'm sorry that I haven't introduced you to some of the employees here. Dennis, this is Mr. Jack, the owner of this building." The moment that Dennis heard that Jack was the owner of the building, he was shocked. He then thought to himself, "Why am I so stupid? Anyone who can say something like there are free floors here would definitely have to be the owner. After all, how can the guards allow him to enter when nobody other than members of the management department can come in other than the hygiene department?" As he thought to this point, his back was drenched in sweat. He bowed to Jack and said, "I'm sorry, sir, for my ignorance. No need to sweat about it. You didn't know about me, so you don't need to worry. Just do your work well," Jack said. "Thank you, boss." Dennis nodded before going back to his desk. Celine, on the other hand, was surprised. According to what Jack had told her previously, he had invested more than $150 million in the grocery department. But now, if this building was added, considering the location as well as the design, it should cost more than $500 million. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but wonder what Jack's real background was. To be able to afford such a building, Jack had to have enough money in stock to make sure that the company had money to ensure that the business was running. After getting into the elevator, they headed towards the 7th floor. As soon as they got out of the elevator, Celine pulled Jack aside and asked, "You bought the whole building?" "Yeah, I bought it on Saturday," Jack replied calmly. After a moment, he continued, "Interested in relocating the office here?" Till this moment, Celine still found it hard to believe that Jack was solely depending on himself. And if it was true, from what family was he from to be able to get that amount of money? He had to come from a prominent one. But, in the capital where her family was based, she didn't hear of his name. Someone like Jack, with amazing looks and ambition, she was sure that she would have heard about him. But she never heard of him. Thinking to this point, she noticed that till this moment, Jack had never given away his surname. After a moment of thinking, Celine shook her head and said, "Not for now. I have to stabilize the condition of the company first. Once the company is on track, I can see if it's possible to transfer it." "All right then. You can just choose a floor and I'll reserve it for you," Jack said. "Okay then." Celine nodded as they followed Chris into a meeting room. The room was quite big in that it could accommodate almost 50 people at the same time. There was a long table that was covered in a white cloth. There were chairs surrounding the rectangular table. The main seat was placed on one end of the table. Then, on its right, there was another chair that was slightly to the side. Then, the other chairs followed. Currently, in the room, there were 8 people in the room including Agnes. Although Agnes wasn't a manager yet, she would be holding the position as soon as she moves to the newly bought shop in Yellow City and hires some people to do the work that she was doing. Alongside Chris, it could be said that there were 9 managers, each zone having a manager of its own. Chris was in charge of all these managers. But there would be another manager coming in soon who would be in charge of everyone, including Chris. Maybe in the future, he may make her the general manager of several departments in Jackson Enterprise. But that would obviously have to depend on her performance. Otherwise, why would he just promote someone if they didn't put on an effort in their work? After sitting on the main seat, Celine sat to his right while Chris to his left. Although this could have been considered as a meeting that only involved the core members of the department, Jack didn't mind Celine's presence at all. There was nothing that much important that they were discussing and could be used against him in the future. Furthermore, he believed that since the two of them were not enemies, she wouldn't attack him, right? The discussion was mainly on how to ensure that all the groceries in the town were run accordingly. Upon seeing the ideas that they were giving, he felt that there was nothing wrong for now. Celine would also occasionally point out a few things that she felt would be good. At the end of the meeting, it was decided that advertisement would be carried out. Jack wanted to make sure that he would begin accumulating the reputation for the enterprise before it went public in the future. He then left Chris an instruction to open the department's bank account. He had previously forgotten about it, but now, he could let Chris handle it. After the meeting was over, Jack left with Celine. After leaving the building, he asked, "Where are you going to next?" "I want to go back to the company. There's so much to handle at the moment and I'm afraid that Faith might be overwhelmed. The company will start operating next month and there are still a few more things that need handling," Celine replied. Jack nodded. He too knew that starting a company from scratch required both time and dedication. It wasn't a simple thing as starting a stall by the roadside. "Where are you heading to now?" Celine asked curiously. "I'm going to the bank. I have something to discuss with the manager, Mr. Heyman," Jack replied. Celine nodded. She didn't ask what the discussion was about as the level of trust between them hadn't reached that level yet. After getting to Glaze Hotel, it was already noon. So, they took their lunch together before Jack sent Celine to the company. The company was called Eminent Beauty. After dropping her off, Jack drove the Bentley Continental GT towards the bank building. After parking, he stepped into the bank's lobby area. Just as he had thought, the bank was almost full to the brink. Although the seats were all occupied, there were still some people that had decided to wait while standing. Jack just sighed as he stepped into the elevator. If his business had so many customers, he surely would benefit greatly. Not long after that, the elevator opened on the 7th floor. The moment that he stepped onto this floor, he found that there were two people who seemed to be waiting for their turn to arrive. Jack wasn't sure if there was a person inside or not. But what he knew was that what he wanted to talk to Heyman about wasn't going to take long. So, he walked towards the reception. Ivy was still there, doing her job as a secretary. The moment that he arrived in front of her desk, he found that she was quite busy with something on her computer. Upon noticing that there was someone in front of her desk, without even raising her head, she said, "Can you please wait for a moment? In 5 minutes, I'll be done here. You can wait at the lobby area." According to the way that she was saying these words, Jack could see that it seemed that she was used to saying them. "Miss Ivy, I've got an issue to discuss with Mr. Heyman. I don't know if that's possible?" Jack asked. The moment that Ivy heard the familiar voice, she raised her head hurriedly and looked at Jack. The moment that she confirmed that he was the one, she greeted, "Hello, Mr. Jack. I didn't know that you were the one here." Chapter 53, Safety Enforcers. "Just a small thing brought me here," Jack replied with a smile. "I will tell Mr. Heyman immediately," Ivy said as she went towards the door that led to Heyman's office. "Thanks in advance," Jack said as he went to seat alongside the two that were waiting for their turn. Currently, these people's expressions were not looking good. After all, they had come here and were told to wait. They didn't know what was going on, but the moment that Jack arrived, they saw that the attitude of the secretary was better when she spoke to Jack as compared to them. They were veterans in business and they knew very well that all those that came here were big shots. And although Jack looked young, his temperament didn't look like the wastrel young master's. From the way that he carried himself around and the way that he spoke, it was obvious that he was from a good background. But how could a young master compare to them, bigwigs in the real estate industry? Now, they were seeing how a junior that had just arrived after them was being given a priority. This obviously displeased them. "Hey kid, what's the deal with that secretary?" the big-eyed man asked Jack with a displeased tone. "What are you talking about?" Jack was confused by what this man was trying to imply. "Kid, what do you want to do in there that they can give you a priority?" a thin man asked. "I don't think that's something that I'm supposed to tell you, right?" Jack frowned as he replied. "Don't be too uptight here. We're all here to do the same thing. Aren't you here to upgrade your card? Or get one?" the big-eyed man asked. Although the main reason as to why he was here was to ask for a company that he could buy, Jack would also take this opportunity to upgrade his card as well. "Yeah, I guess so." Jack nodded. "Then why are you being given much priority when compared to us? We came here over half an hour ago, but we still haven't been allowed to enter. Now that you're here, the secretary has decided to let you in," the thin man asked. "I don't know. All I know is the fact that I'm here for the upgrade. As for the reason as to why I'm being given priority, that's a question that you can ask the secretary," Jack replied as he decided to ignore them. The thin man and the big-eyed man frowned as their expressions darkened. Jack was obviously younger than them, and for one thing that they knew was the fact that they were big shots. They were rich, and there was nobody in the younger generation that had ever dared to talk to them in such a manner. This was obviously the first time that this had happened. How could they tolerate this? So, the big-eyed man immediately retorted, "Kid, I don't care who you are, but let me tell you something. If you dare mess with me, I'll make sure that your life becomes a loving hell in this city." Jack completely ignored him as he wondered, why is it that almost everyone that is from this city, as long as he is giving out a threat, he will say that my life won't be good here? Is there something with my life here, or is this the word that is often used to scare off children? Jack thought that this guy wasn't serious. If it was the Alfonso family that was making trouble for him, he would surely have to go through some trouble before he could firmly establish himself. But the small families like Dante family, as well as this guy that he didn't know, he had no worries at all. They only had their connections in this city. But outside this city, their connections were poor. This was what differentiated them from Alfonso family that had its influence running deep in more than 3 cities, with Crystal City as the main ground. Seeing that Jack didn't take his threats seriously, the man was about to start cursing him when the door that led to Heyman's office opened as Heyman rushed out with an excited expression. He looked around before his eyes locked onto Jack. The moment that he saw him, he rushed forward before extending his hand in greeting. "Mr. Jack, you're here. I was kind of expecting you to come back, but I never thought that it would be this soon." Jack stood up as he received Heyman's hand. Although Heyman was enthusiastic, Jack had a calm composure. He replied, "Mr. Heyman, I already told you that you had to prepare yourself to carry out upgrades a few more times." Jack replied politely. Although he had over $10 billion in his account, he didn't become arrogant. He knew that he would need other people's help in the future. A good example being on this day where he wanted Heyman to recommend to him a good company to purchase. Although he could have asked Celine about it, as she seemed to have a good background, he didn't want to depend on a woman to increase his influence if not necessary. What's more, they had only gotten acquainted to each other the previous night. He had already asked for a manager. If he asked for other things again, he was sure that things would get somehow complicated. On the other hand, Heyman was someone that had a cooperation with him in the area of business. He was using his bank, and there was no problem asking for a little favor to repay in the future, right? Ha ha ha, you're right. You were only here on Saturday. I thought that you would be coming here after half a year in the least. Who knew that you would be here in 2 days? Heyman chuckled as he released Jack's hand. The more that Jack saved, the better his working report would be. Furthermore, Jack was using his branch to upgrade his account. This will all be seen by the higher-ups, and at the end of it all, they would see that he had retained a good customer. So, his salary would be increased, or he might even be promoted. The two people that were waiting were surprised upon seeing Haman charging out of his office. They were even more shocked the moment that they saw how enthusiastic he was towards Jack. At this moment, their backs were getting drenched in sweat thinking of how they were treating Jack not long ago. For Jack to be treated in such a manner by the manager of Flyers Bank, although it was just a branch, showed that he was someone that they could not afford to offend. After all, Haman had never treated them in such a manner. It was the other way round. They had to fawn upon Haman. But they couldn't accept the fact that Haman gave them a different treatment as compared to Jack. After all, they were here first, and Haman had been cooped up in his office for over half an hour without responding to them. But the moment that he heard that Jack was here, he rushed out enthusiastically. They could even feel that he had some respect for Jack, which P** set them off. "Hello, Mr. Haman. Can you help us first? After all, we came here first." Failing to hold back, with a low voice, the big-eyed man spoke. Haman was just about to invite Jack into the office when he was interrupted. Obviously, he didn't like it when he was interrupted while doing something important. He looked at the big-eyed man and the thin one beside him and said with a frown, "The two of you have been disturbing me for the past few days already. You all know the rules of the bank. There's no way that I can upgrade your card without your accounts having enough deposit. Furthermore, you only want the upgrade so that you can borrow a loan. That won't work." Haman said before turning towards Jack and said, "Mr. Jack, let's talk inside the office." "Mr. Haman, aren't we just going to have an agreement? You know about the real estate industry. It's doing well recently as the prices of the houses have began rising. Once we get the money, we will obviously be able to pay off the loan with the highest interest." The thin man spoke hurriedly when he saw that Haman was leaving. These guys wanted Haman to help them acquire a higher level of card here, a black card. After getting it, they would immediately borrow a loan from the bank. Since all of this would be under Haman's approval, it would surely bring him trouble in the future if the higher-ups found out about this and the duo failed to repay the loan on time. He would have to suffer the consequences. Now that there was Jack, why would he have to care about some of the things that would risk his career? "Miss Ivy, please send the guests away," Haman said to Ivy, who had just returned to her desk. "Yes, Mr. Haman," Ivy replied. After getting into the office, Jack was invited to take a seat. After that, Haman thanked him for depositing the $10 billion the night before. After that, he immediately handed the prepared upgrade card as Jack returned the black card. There was also an update on the privileges that he would be receiving. They were better than the previous ones. The maximum amount of the overdrawn was set at $10 billion. "By the way, Mr. Haman, I wanted to enter the security industry. Today, the main reason for coming here was to see if you can recommend one to me. I want to fully buy it," Jack stated after the matter of the card was put aside. Haman was startled by Jack's request. He hadn't thought that Jack thought so highly of him. But, now that he was given the opportunity, he would grab it with both arms to make sure that the relationship between them would be better in the future. "Ha ha ha, I see. That's not a problem at all. I happen to have a friend of mine that owns a security company. Coincidentally, he wants to sell it off. The performance is good. It's just that he wants to change the industry and lacks capital. Otherwise, he wouldn't have sold it," Haman replied with a wide smile. When Jack heard these words, he was both relieved and excited. This was perfect. Good performance, and at the same time, the owner was going to sell it. So, he smiled sincerely as he said, "Thank you in advance, Mr. Haman. May I know what company it is?" "It is called Safety Enforcers," Haman replied with a smile. Chapter 54, Delivery. The moment that Jack heard the name Safety Enforcers, he was quite surprised. He had not expected that. The friend that Haman was talking about was the owner of Safety Enforcers. Safety Enforcers wasn't a small company. It was a middle-sized security company in the country. It had spread into several cities already. In total, its influence had spread to over 7 cities. This was already enough to state that it was not a small company. Although Jack was surprised, he was not surprised by the fact that Heyman had connections with such a big shot. He was a manager of the bank after all. So, it was quite obvious that he would interact with several big shots present in the country as long as they visited the bank. There is absolutely no problem at all. If he is willing to sell it, then I am willing to buy it, Jack stated after a moment of silence. Heyman, on the other hand, immediately revealed a happy expression. In this situation, he was like a broker. His friend had stated that he was going to sell his company so that he could get more capital for the new industry that he was joining. Of course, for such a person to make a decision to change the industry in which he was focused on wasn't something that was decided on a spur of a moment. If he was that kind of a person, then the current security company would have surely failed. If Heyman managed to make Jack to buy the company, he not only would have done his friend a favor, he would have done Jack a favor as well. In this way, he was getting double profits. That was the exact reason as to why he revealed the excited expression. Although he was not usually a scheming person, he wouldn't dare to let a chance of getting benefits that had presented itself in front of him go. If he could snatch it without creating enemies, why would he hesitate? Okay then, Mr. Jack. I'll give you the contact details so that you can contact him at your free time. But you'll have to make sure that it is as early as possible so that you can get the company before he sells it. I will call him in advance to tell him about you, Heyman said as he stared at Jack. Although Jack was quite young, upon seeing the excited Heyman, he knew that he was going to benefit from this deal. But he didn't care because there was nothing that he was going to lose. So, he immediately agreed and took the contact details from Heyman. After chatting for a while, Jack finally decided to leave. He would contact the owner of the security company after getting back home. It was already afternoon and he still had other things to do. After being escorted out of the office by the enthusiastic Heyman, Jack entered the elevator and headed towards the ground floor. Upon reaching there, he found that the floor was busy just like how it was when he entered. Looking at the large number of customers that were waiting in line, Jack's eyes shone with a hint of greed. He wondered when his grocery department would have such a large number of people wanting to buy things from them. Each and every person present represented at least $100. In other words, as long as the people who visited his groceries spent at least $1, with the system, it would be multiplied to $100. Although personally, he didn't care much about money as currently in his account there are more than $10 billion, that didn't imply that the enterprise that he was starting didn't require much more money. An international brand wasn't something that could be built with just a little bit of money. Even the $10 billion in his account was nothing at all if he really wanted to create an international brand. Shaking his head, Jack walked out of the building before driving away. He wanted to get back to the Prince and Princess Palace so that he could start organizing and arranging what to do next. On the way, his phone suddenly rang. Looking at the familiar number, he immediately received the call. "Hello, Mr. Jack." Evans's voice came from the other side of the phone. Although Jack wasn't sure why Evans had called him, he still greeted back the other party. After that, he asked for the reason of the call. "Mr. Jack, the cars that you had ordered previously have all arrived. I was asking for the delivery location. Should I deliver them to the mansion or should I deliver them somewhere else? If there is somewhere that I am supposed to deliver them to, you can send me the location," Evans said. Jack's brows rose a little bit the moment that he heard that the cars that he had ordered before were about to be delivered. He had thought that it would take a little more time. It turned out that the Bentley company was quite fast in its actions. They had already repainted and added the logo that Jack had sent them. All the cars that he had ordered and been repainted, and all of them had a logo with the additional G.D on them. Jack had decided that all the things that were related to the grocery department would be painted green. After thinking for a moment, Jack decided to have all the cars to be delivered at the palace. After all, the palace had a larger parking area that could accommodate all the cars that he had bought. Although the enterprise had already begun to run, it currently comprised of only one department. As such, all the cars that had been bought would not be used. Even if he decided to give the upper management of the grocery department a car, more than 10 of them would still remain. As he thought of this, he immediately decided that, once everything was in position in this city, he would let the general manager of the grocery department to expand the influence to another city. Although he could do this by himself, he still had other things to do. As such, if he could use the upper management of the grocery department to expand, he would do so without hesitation. From Celine's words, Jack knew that the general manager that he was going to hire would definitely have the capabilities of expanding the business without much supervision. After all, she was recommended by Celine. Not long after hanging up, Jack arrived at the palace. He found that there were several trucks that had lined up in front of his gate. And from the logo, he could already tell that they were from Bentley. Jack immediately slapped his forehead at the thought of not informing the guards to let the trucks into the compound. According to the policy of the security company, they would not let anybody into the compound unless they were allowed by the owner. That was the exact reason as to why, although the trucks outside were from Bentley, the guards had not allowed them in. Jack drove towards the gate, and before he could reach it, the gate was opened. As he entered, he signaled for the guards to let the trucks into the compound. After parking the Bentley Continental GT into the garage, he got down and looked at the trucks that had entered the compound. Evans alighted from one of the trucks and headed towards him. Jack nodded at him, signaling for him to unload the cars from the trucks. One had to know that Jack had bought more than 20 cars and they were both being delivered at this moment. So, there were currently more than 5 trucks in his compound. To be exact, there were 8 trucks present. Each truck carried 3 cars, except for one that had one. One by one, the staff members of the Bentley shop began unloading the cars. Jack pointed towards the garage, and the cars that were being unloaded were parked there. Of course, the garage could not accommodate over 20 cars at the same time. So, the other cars were parked out of the garage. The good thing was that the compound of the palace was far bigger. There was a big space that had interlocking tiles. So, although the cars were parked outside the garage, they did not ruin the vegetation of the palace. All the cars were painted lime green. As they were parked in rows, they gave a picturesque scene. Jack could not help but admire them. After all, not only were the cars new, shining in the afternoon sun, but their green color matched the green of the vegetation in the palace compound. After all the cars were unloaded, Evans handed over the receipt to Jack. Jack looked at the receipt in his hand and then stared at the 23 cars that had been parked. He nodded the moment that he noticed that there was nothing wrong with the cars. Since he had bought 24 Bentley Bentegas, he was done with the grocery department. He took out his phone to contact George. The other Bentley had to be delivered here so that Evans could take it back for the repainting and the logo. Chapter 55, Grace. After making the call, Jack welcomed Evans and the others into the mansion. These guys had worked hard unloading over 20 cars. So, they needed to rest. For that reason, they could rest while waiting for George. Of course, since he had no maid, Jack entered the kitchen and prepared coffee for Evans and the others. As they took sips of the coffee, they chatted about this and that. During this period of time, Jack mostly listened to what they were saying. He had gotten used to not speaking too much. After all, back at the Alfonso mansion, even if he wanted to speak to others, who would talk to him after all? They ostracized him. As a result, he was used to speaking only when necessary. About 20 minutes later, George arrived. He was dazzled by the rows of cars that were parked in Palace's compound. The moment that he saw them, he immediately knew that they were the ones that Jack had ordered previously. After all, he could see the same logo on the cars as the ones that were painted on the stores. He was mesmerized by Jack's way of thinking. After all, there were not many people who could decide to buy so many vehicles for their subordinates when they were just at starting phase of the company. Even their Dante Corporation only had a few cars that were used by the topmost management of the company. It was not that they were poor, It was just that they thought that it wasn't necessary. On the other hand, Jack had bought an apartment where the staff members in Yellow Street as well as Alpine Street could reside in. Although the stores at the apartment that he had bought weren't far away from each other, Jack allowed them to use the Bentley Bentayga to move around. Getting out of his thoughts, George immediately rushed towards the mansion. He had almost forgotten that there were people that were waiting for him. Although this was not the first time that he had been here, he still could not help but be impressed by the mansions. "Oh, George is here," Jack stated the moment that he saw George entering the mansion. Evans, who was chatting with some of his subordinates, immediately stopped. He rose to his feet as he bid goodbye to Jack. With that, he left alongside his subordinates. After the two of them remained, it seemed that George had something to say to Jack. "What is it? Just say it out loud, there's no need to hide anything," Jack said. After a moment of arranging his thoughts, George finally spoke. "Boss, there's someone who's trying to cause trouble for the stores. If I am not wrong, it should be my third uncle." Jack frowned the moment that he heard that there was someone who was trying to cause trouble for the stores that he had just opened. A week was only going to end on this day, yet there was someone causing trouble. And the moment that he heard that it might be George's third uncle, his frown deepened even further. He began thinking if there was a time that he had offended someone from the Dante family. "Who is your third uncle?" Jack asked after thinking for a long time without getting any result. "My third uncle is called Frank," George replied honestly. Although he was not using the family's influence during the past 5 years, he still had someone who informed him of what is happening in the family. Thus, although the gangsters that had began causing trouble were not that much obvious, he was sure they would start being active in about a week. According to the information that he gotten, this group of gangsters was hired by his third uncle. But the only problem till this moment was that he did not know what was the reason behind it. The moment that George mentioned Frank, it was the moment that Jack suddenly remembered the incident that had occurred on Saturday. On that day, he had gone to check out the building when he met with Frank, who was barking threats and curses. The guy had pointed his finger at him and Jack had dislocated it. Thinking of this, he wondered if this was the reason as to why he had began causing problems for him, or if it was related to him buying the building. If George hadn't mentioned about that guy, Jack would have already forgotten about him. After thinking things through, he thought that it seemed that he couldn't get answers at this moment. So, he decided to set this matter aside for the moment. Since this guy was from the Dante family, it wasn't a surprise that he could investigate Jack's identity. As for how much information he had gotten, Jack wasn't worried at all. Since he was a member of Alfonso family not more than a week ago, only the information that he had revealed here in Inchoate could be found. Now that they had began sending gangsters to his store, it was obvious that this guy wanted to play underhanded tricks. Jack wasn't going to let this slide. He was going to hurry up the issue of getting the security company. In this way, he would have people to deploy to deal with such cases. So, he made a decision to call the other party as early as possible. With that thought in mind, he turned his gaze to George and said, "Worry not about that. As long as he doesn't cross the line, we can deal with the little gangsters." George nodded. After all, he knew that this matter concerned his family as well. Frank was a member of the Dante family. If Jack decided to get back at him, he would obviously attack the companies that were under him. But, the position that Frank was holding was the CEO of one of the companies under Dante Corporation. If Jack attacked the company, he would surely be attacking the Dante family. In the end, this would evolve to a war between the Dante family and Jack. Although Jack wasn't in a good relationship with his family currently, with his actions during the past week, it was obvious that he had a big background that wasn't Alfonso family. After all, how else would he get the money, millions of dollars, to do things the way that he was? It was obvious that it was impossible for him to be a prodigal, considering that everything that he was doing had its own role in the long run. Although he had bought so many cars at the same time, it still didn't seem to affect his money flow at all. After talking for a little while longer, George left with one of the cars that had been parked here. Jack then decided that he would call Chris to come with the other managers to pick a car that would be used by them. He was just about to call when his phone rang. Looking at the unfamiliar number, Jack frowned for a moment. He wondered who it was that was calling him. But anyway, he received the call. The moment that it connected, a female voice came over. "Hello, is this Mr. Jack?" "Yes, it is." "May I know who I'm speaking to?" Jack inquired. "I'm Grace. Miss Gravy gave me your phone number and told me that you needed a manager." The lady replied. From the voice, Jack could feel the confidence as well as expectation. But what had surprised him was the fact that the other party had called him. He had thought that they would talk about the issue on the following day. Who knew that she would call in advance? "Oh, hello, Miss Grace. It's true that I wanted a manager. The position is the general manager of a department. It is already stabilized, but there are some of the things that still need to be adjusted." Jack spoke. "Oh, I see. Is there any requirement that I need to fulfill?" Grace asked. There was a hint of joy in her voice as well. "Well, since it was Celine that recommended you, I assume that your performance is good. As a result, I won't trouble you that much. So, I can say that you can start working after we sign a contract." Jack replied. According to the descriptions that he had gotten from Celine about Grace, he felt that she was good. That was the trait of the person that could manage a department. After all, there was no way that he was going to take an indecisive person to manage a business for him. But if she performs poorly, there was still the issue of him sacking her. He didn't want to suffer unwanted losses for nothing. "Okay then. I'll be there on time. So, at what time can we discuss the issue about the contract?" Grace asked. "Tomorrow at around 9. I assume that you're coming to Inchoate City. So, let's meet at the Business Overlord Building, 7th floor." Jack said. "Okay. I'll be there on time." Grace replied before Jack hung up the call. Now that one of the issues was out of the way, it was time for him to look at the security company. Scrolling through his contact list, he found the contact that Heyman had given him. The owner of Safety Enforcers was called Edwin. So, Jack immediately made a call. Not long after that, the call was received and an inquiring heavy male voice came through. "Hello, who's this?" "Hello, I'm Jack." "Mr. Edwin, I was referred to you by Mr. Heyman." Jack replied. Chapter 56, Is It That Cheap? Jack immediately made a call. Not long after that, the call was received and an inquiring heavy male voice came through. "Hello, who's this?" "Hello, I'm Jack." "Mr. Edwin, I was referred to you by Mr. Heyman." Jack replied. "Oh, that guy? Anyway, he told me about you. Are you sure that you're interested in my company?" Edwin asked. Although Heyman had already told him about Jack not long ago, he still had some doubts about it. After all, the owner of the voice that he was talking to was so young. Although his company was only a middle-sized one, that didn't imply that it was cheap. After all, one had to consider the fact that he was selling the company alongside the assets, the employees and the contracts that they had already signed. In other words, as long as Jack took over the company, he would continue running it the way it was. He could decide to make changes on it, but that wouldn't affect the company that much as long as the changes weren't major. To be honest with you, it's not that I'm interested in your company. The truth is that I wanted to enter the security industry and was looking for a company that I could buy. In the end, yours was the one that was recommended to me by Mr. Heyman." Jack replied honestly. Inside an office, Edwin's brows furrowed the moment that he heard Jack's words. Then, he thought to himself, if you're not interested, then why are you calling me? Aren't you interested in buying it? That's called interest, all right. After calming himself down, he immediately replied, "It's good that you're sincere, Mr. Jack. So, are you sure that you want to buy it, or is it that you're just asking?" On the other side, Jack could hear that there was a hint of impatience in the other party's voice. He wondered to himself about what he'd said wrong to make the other party's impression of him to drop. Leaving that aside, he replied, "I want to buy it." And, I mean by it. So, I think that we can discuss the contract, right? Jack asked. Upon hearing Jack's words, Edwin's expression eased for a moment. But, the issue concerning a big company like his wasn't something that could be discussed on the phone. So, it would be good if they could meet face to face. In this way, they could come to an agreement and sign the transfer contract at that exact moment. So, he asked, can we meet to discuss about this? Where can we meet? You can decide on the location as well as time. Jack asked in reply. After thinking for a moment, Edwin replied, can you come to Venture City? Jack thought for a moment and agreed to it. He had a Eurocopter that was in parking. He could use it to get there. Although he could not fly it, he could still get someone that could do that. After agreeing on the time of the meeting, Jack ended the call. He then sat there while thinking to himself, wondering what he was going to do next. After a moment of thinking, he decided to check out the data concerning this security company. He had no laptop at all. The one that he had been having before broke down. Of course, there was no way that it would simply break down, right? This was the handiwork of his half-siblings. The good thing was that there was nothing important that was saved in the laptop. But even if there was, he would have a backup. Since the laptop stopped working, he decided not to buy another one to save money. After all, at the end of the day, back then, there was no use of the laptop at all. But now that he was going to have an enterprise, it would be important to have one. So, he entered an online shop and placed an order for the best laptop that he could find. Of course, the best that he knew was the most expensive one. That was his only method of finding the best product. After placing the order, he was informed that it would be delivered by evening. After that, he entered the internet and began searching for information about safety enforcers. Although it was not a listed company, it was obvious that the information concerning it would be found in the internet considering the fact that it was a middle-sized security company. After searching, there were several results that were revealed. There was the information about the date that it was started and so on. But Jack wasn't interested in that at all. He looked at its net worth currently. This would make him know what amount of money he had to prepare when he went to meet with Edwin the following day. While looking at the information that was given, Jack frowned for a moment. According to what he could see, this company was worth $2 billion. If they discussed about the purchasing price and so on, he was sure that he would end up spending more than that. But, he thought to himself, are the companies this cheap nowadays? Of course, that was simply due to the fact that he had money in his account. Otherwise, he wouldn't dare to say that. Furthermore, such a company that was started from scratch didn't start with it being worth billions. This company had began over a decade ago. It had been growing ever since for it to reach its current level. After all, not everyone had a system with him. It was just that Jack had a system, and that was the reason as to why he wasn't afraid of risks in business. Others would have to consider all the factors that could be considered before they could invest into something. Just like Edwin, although he was changing from one industry to another, it wasn't that he was going to start from scratch. He had already joined the industry, but it was just that he wasn't focusing on it. But now, he wanted money so that he could put all of his efforts there. In other words, he had already tested the industry for a period of time before deciding to expand. But even so, he still maintained his cautiousness. After checking the information about the security company, Jack was impressed by it. Although it wasn't that big, it still was good, as even he had heard of it before today. Now that he knew all the basic information that he needed to know, Jack decided to check if there was another company that could interest him. After looking through the security companies for a period of time, Jack lost his interest. It wasn't that there were no companies that could be bought by him. It was just that these companies were either expensive for the current him, not for sale, or maybe they were at a lower level as compared to safety enforcers. He thought if there was anything that he needed to do at the moment. After thinking for a long moment, he felt that although he had many things to do, they all had a specific day that could be done. Grace, the following day. Edwin, the following day. Ben, he wasn't sure about the specific date as Ben had said that it would be done in 3 days. Oh, there was something that he had almost forgot about after surfing in the internet for a period of time. That was finding a pilot that could fly the Eurocopter. Although the Eurocopter that was given to him by the system was customized and differed from the others, with Eco, the Eurocopter's AI, he was sure that as long as one was a professional pilot, he would be able to fly it. He immediately looked for a company from where he could hire a pilot. He found one that was called Skyflight Charters. This organization was well known as it had a good reputation. Of course, all of this was known to Jack through the internet. Otherwise, how was he supposed to interact with pilots before today? After looking at the information, he found one pilot that was to his liking. It was a middle-aged man with 5 years of experience. According to the information about him, it was said that he was good in flying helicopters the most, as most of the people that hired helicopters or pilots were mainly for helicopters. If one had a private plane or jet, why would he hire a pilot for a short period of time? He would simply find one that would be permanent. The reason for choosing this man was simple. Apart from his experience, he thought that the middle-aged man wouldn't be too chatty, or so he hoped. After confirming everything, Jack immediately made a call. Meanwhile, in the Alfonso mansion, the atmosphere was quite lively. The reason behind this was due to the fact that there was a member of a big family that was visiting them on this day. The other family was far bigger than Alfonso family and was situated in the capital. So, of course, the members of Alfonso family had to be meticulous in their preparations to receive them. At this moment, not just the current CEO of Alfonso Group was standing at the entrance, even Jack's grandfather, Victor Alfonso, was also present. They were not the only ones there, as there were several others that were present here as well. In other words, all the members of Alfonso family, as long as they were nearby, they had been called back, with the exception of Jack, to welcome the special guests. "Dad, do you know why they are talking about engagement all of a sudden?" Jack's father, Dalton, asked Victor. "What's there to be worried about? This is a good thing for our family. Maybe we may rise and be able to compete with some families in the capital." Victor replied with a smile plastered on his face. Chapter 57, Your Youngest Son. "Dad, do you know why they are talking about engagement all of a sudden?" Jack's father, Dalton, asked Victor. "What's there to be worried about? This is a good thing for our family. Maybe we may rise and be able to compete with some families in the capital." Victor replied with a smile plastered on his face. The moment that Dalton heard his father's words, he was at first surprised, then the next moment he was ecstatic. This was a great opportunity for his Alfonso family. After all, a member of a big family wanted to marry one of the sons or daughters of Alfonso family. Even if it won't be one of his children, or even if it was his brother's child, he would still benefit at the end of it, as he was the current family head. With the support of such a big family, he could start influencing the capital city. Furthermore, with such a connection, he could start expanding the influence of the Alfonso Group. As such, the competition that he would be experiencing from other families from other cities would be greatly diminished, if not removed. As he thought of this, a smile gradually appeared on his face. He could not wait to know who was going to get married or being married. The other party had just stated that they were coming for an engagement. But till this moment, they didn't know if the one that was coming with the old man was a boy or a girl. It was at this moment that Dalton finally understood why his father Victor had summoned all the members of Alfonso family to come back. Furthermore, he had made sure to summon back even those that had gone to other cities, as long as they had not married or been married. That's right, only those that were in marriage were spared from this. Although there were some of the family members that had been engaged already, the old man didn't care about it. Engagements could be broken as long as that person was selected by the old man that was coming. "Are you sure that all the preparations are in position?" Victor suddenly asked, bringing Dalton out of his thoughts. "Yes, father, I have already made all the arrangements that are necessary. I know how important this occasion is, so I won't mess up," Dalton replied confidently. Victor nodded in satisfaction while looking at the members of the Alfonso family that were standing with him at the entrance. He suddenly frowned as he looked into the crowd. Upon noticing the frown on Victor's face, Dalton asked, "Father, is something wrong?" At this moment, Victor shifted his gaze towards Dalton as he asked with confusion, "Where is that little brat, Jack?" Upon hearing this question, Dalton's heart skipped a beat. When he made a decision to expel Jack from the Alfonso family, he hadn't asked his father about his opinion. His father was away at that time and only came back the previous night with the news about the engagement. He had planned to tell him later, but he had forgotten about it with the news of the engagement coming in. It was only at this moment that he was reminded about it. After hesitating for a moment, he replied without hiding a thing. He told the old man about everything that had happened since Jack's departure. The more the old man listened, the colder his expression became. It was a sure bet that his anger was soaring at the moment. "Why did you come to such a decision without consulting me?" Victor roared at this moment. This roar immediately attracted the attention of the other members of the Alfonso family. But although their attention was attracted by the shout, it had successfully repelled them as their bodies tried to move as far away as possible from the old man. None of them didn't know about the old man's temper. As long as he was angered, he would turn the house upside down till the moment that his anger would cool down. Facing the angry old man, even Dalton was flustered. He took a deep breath, but he didn't dare to speak a word. He knew that the more he spoke, the more he would anger the old man. After ranting for a while, Victor calmed down. This was not just because of his anger had calmed down at the moment, it was simply because there were visitors, very important ones as a matter of fact, that were coming not long from that moment. "Let us receive the guests first. After they leave, we will talk about this," Victor stated as he tried to retain his composure. Although he didn't like Jack, that didn't mean that it was to the extent of expelling him from the family. He was an Alfonso at the end of the day. And no matter what they did, if they took a DNA test, they would still find that he had the Alfonso bloodline. I want to see how he gets out of this now. He decisively expelled his own son out of the family just to maintain his reputation. Now that the old man is back, he sure is going to suffer. Oh, I can't wait for the time that the visitors will be leaving. At that time, there will be a good show to watch. At the side, those that were competing for the CEO position or they didn't like Dalton, began murmuring to each other. It was only when Victor glared at them that they shrunk their necks and kept quiet. But the look of contempt, as well as a look of expectation, didn't disappear from their faces. After all, this was one of the rare chances when the old man was angry at Dalton. So, they would make sure that they used it to the maximum possible. Just as the old man was about to berate them, a car's honking sound made him shift his attention towards the road that led towards the highway. There was a convoy of luxury cars coming towards the entrance of the Alfonso mansion. The old man immediately led the members of Alfonso family to go out and welcome the guests. They escorted the cars to the parking lot. There was a total of 6 cars, with the leading car being a Maybach GLS 600. The others were all Volkswagen Arteon. The moment that the doors of the Volkswagen Arteon opened, several bulky men in black suits and black glasses got out. There were about 20 of them present. 2 of them went forward and opened the doors of the back seat on each side, while the others stood in attention while observing the surroundings. Soon after that, an old man with gray hair alighted with his walking cane. The walking cane was exquisite as it had a raven head. The handle was silver in color while the body was bronze. Just from a glance, one could tell that this walking cane was made from a special material. The old man's face showed that he was in his mid-70s in the least. But his walking posture, although slightly bent, was still energetic and domineering. The aura that was emitted by the old man would make all those that were looking at him feel both respect and fear towards him. Currently, the old man was wearing a white suit. He had a pair of brown shoes on. As he walked forward, the walking stick would occasionally knock onto the ground, making people tense, and sometimes their hearts would skip a beat. On the other side of the car, a young lady that seemed to be 18 or 19 years old alighted. She was a beauty with a rating of 91. green hair that dropped to her shoulders, gray eyes that matched the old man's as well as a good figure. As soon as she alighted, most of the males couldn't help but swallow their saliva loudly. The purple dress that she was wearing accentuated her figure so well in that, even those that were nearing their 30s were mesmerized by her. Steve was amongst those that couldn't help but stare at her. But he knew his limits and managed to shift his gaze towards the side. After all, this wasn't a simple girl that he could hit on. But he thought of something. That was the fact that the two were here for an engagement. If they chose him, he would have this beauty to himself as his wife in the future. He straightened his posture and tried to make sure that he would stand out among the crowd of the youths that were waiting and watching with hints of greed in their eyes. The young lady walked towards the old man and held one of his arms as support. Although the old man was energetic, the lady seemed to be more concerned about him. The old man simply smiled as he rubbed her head. He really doted on this granddaughter of his. "Welcome, Master Alton, and young miss." Victor went forward as he gave the old man a bow. The other members of Alfonso family immediately followed the gesture as they greeted the duo. Alton nodded in satisfaction at the attitude that the family was showing. He rubbed the beard on his chin as he revealed a smile. He then waved his hand at Victor and the others. "No need to be so polite, no need to be so polite. You all can rise up." Victor and the others immediately rose, their upper bodies that were slightly bent. After that, they welcomed the old man and his granddaughter into the well-decorated mansion. After serving them with a cup of tea with a few snacks, Victor and the others waited patiently for the old man to speak. The boys were already looking at the old man with expectation in their eyes. Since there was only the old man and the girl, it was obvious that the one that was here for the engagement was the girl. So, the young men in the family were excited, waiting for the old man to say who she was getting engaged to. Upon seeing the expectant look of the crowd, Alton put the cup of tea on the table and spoke. "I guess you all know the reason for my visit today. So, I don't think that I need to repeat myself. As you can see, my granddaughter here is the one that is going to get engaged." Although the engagement was a decision made by Alton, none of the members of Alfonso family refuted, as they lost nothing at all. In fact, they would benefit a lot from this. "So, Master Alton, can you tell me to whom you wanted your granddaughter to be betrothed to?" Victor asked after the old man finished speaking. He too was quite expectant to see which of his grandchildren was going to be selected. Alton shifted his gaze to Dalton as he spoke with a smile on his face. "Your youngest son." Chapter 58, Bring him back. Alton shifted his gaze to Dalton as he spoke with a smile on his face. "Your youngest son." Alton's words were like an explosive in the hearts of all those present. There was not a single person among them that didn't know the fact that Jack had been expelled from the family almost a week ago. And now, surprisingly, the person that was supposed to be engaged was the same person that they didn't like or had no impression about whatsoever. This came like a huge tide that swept away all the happiness and expectation that they had within them. They were currently in a dilemma on what to do now. Jack had already been expelled and was no longer considered a member of Alfonso family. If they said this to the old man, he would probably be furious with them and end up punishing this family of theirs by suppressing them. Or, he might as well give up on the fact that he'd come here for an engagement. If he left, the easy path to success that was waving at them excitedly a moment ago would wave goodbye at them the next moment. This was something that they absolutely couldn't accept at all. On the other hand, if Jack came back and was engaged to the young lady here, he would definitely have power, and be stronger than his father in terms of authority. And it would be no surprise that he would be the future family head of Alfonso family. In that case, all those that had been suppressing and mistreating him since childhood would surely face the music. After all, it was true that they had made his life difficult. At his age, all the young generation of the family had been given something to do. But Jack, on the other hand, was left alone. After graduation the previous 3 months, he was just there, idle or doing whatever he wanted. Of course, the whatever he wanted never included anything that involved Alfonso family's influence. In other words, whatever he was doing never concerned them. Now, If Jack really got engaged, he surely would be able to get back at them. Just this thought made them shiver. Alton and his granddaughter immediately noticed that something wasn't right with everyone's expression. This made them confused. Was there a problem with Jack, or had what he had just said not been heard? Victor panicked for a moment and stared at Dalton with a murderous gaze. Dalton, on the other hand, was already drenched in cold sweat. He had never cared about this son of his. He was the only one in the entire family that had suffered in the hands of fellow family members. Even during his childhood, he was never there for him. Jack had depended on his mother till he matured early. Now, as he left the family, Dalton decided to use this chance to expel him from the family to clear his image off of the dark spot. Who knew that this was going to be his biggest mistake as well as regret? The black spot was actually a big opportunity for him? Now, not only would he have to face his father's wrath, but he had to look for a method to bring Jack back to the family. What's going on here? Where's Jack? Alton couldn't help but ask at this moment. His expression didn't look that good at all. After all, according to what he had thought, the moment that he mentioned that it was Jack who would have his granddaughter as his fiancée, not only would Jack get excited, but his father would be extremely happy and proud. In the end, everyone's expression was completely opposite of how it was supposed to be. How could he not be furious considering the fact that even the one that was getting engaged with his granddaughter wasn't present at the scene? I'm sorry about that, Master Alton. The truth is that currently, Jack is out of the city. Victor managed to squeeze out a smile on his wrinkled old face. That made him look ugly. Alton frowned the moment that he heard this. Even the lady beside him showed a disappointed expression at this moment. Alton wasn't from a big family for nothing. He had experienced a lot more to be able to maintain his family's position as one of the top families. So, he could tell at a glance that things were not that simple. Furthermore, he had already investigated about Jack the moment that his granddaughter mentioned about him. He found that the boy had good looks, a strong will, and was quite hardworking and smart. Apart from the issue of him not being treated well in the family, there was nothing that was wrong about Jack in the old man's eyes. The information that he had on him was till Sunday, the day before Jack left Crystal City. At that time, he thought that he had gathered enough information and decided to stop investigating him. Can he get here at a short time? Alton asked after noticing the disappointment on his granddaughter's face. He wanted to fulfill his granddaughter's wish, which was to marry Jack. He hadn't come to this decision without thinking things through. His granddaughter, whom he doted on so much, told him that she liked a young man that she had encountered before. She was serious about being married to him. As a result, he tried advising her not to be rash. In the end, due to her stubborn nature, he had no choice but to investigate Jack. After finding out that he wasn't bad, he decided to come on this day when he was free. So, there was no way that he could accept the fact that he had wasted his time for nothing. He had to make sure that his granddaughter was happy. As for Jack, as long as he accepted, no, there was no need for him to accept. He had already decided that he was the one going to marry his granddaughter. He was going to give him support to develop himself. With his brilliance, he was sure that he would be able to develop faster. Furthermore, he would have to be the family head of Alfonso family to have a status that could barely qualify to be matched to his granddaughter. Alton's question made Victor almost helpless. After all, they had already expelled Jack from the family. But, after thinking about the things that would happen if this engagement was successful, he gritted his teeth and looked at Dalton, who was seated beside him. Hurry up and go and fetch that son of yours right at this moment. You better hurry up and bring him back as soon as possible. Don't you keep Master Alton waiting or I won't forgive you. Victor spoke with a low voice. But, his voice contained undeniable command. Dalton nodded his head repeatedly before standing up. After bowing to Alton and the young lady, he rushed out of the mansion. He headed towards the helipad where the helicopter that was used for emergency situations was. He brought alongside him 3 men and the stunned and pale Steve. He was in a hurry as sweat continued trickling on his forehead as if he had just finished toiling a whole acre of land. After getting into the helicopter, he immediately shouted, Get us to Inchoate City as soon as possible. Yes, boss. The pilot responded before starting the helicopter that flew towards Inchoate City at the highest possible speed. Back in Prince and Princess Palace, Jack had no idea about what had just occurred at the Alfonso mansion, nor did he know that he was about to get engaged to someone. Furthermore, his father was coming for him personally. He just sat there on the couch while waiting for his call to connect. Not long after, a feminine voice came through. Skyflight Charters here. May I know to whom am I speaking to and what kind of assistance would you like? The lady asked. Hello, my name is Jackson. I wanted to hire a pilot of your organization. His name is Gabriel Wadi. Jack stated. From when do you want him? The lady asked. From tomorrow, Jack replied. A moment please, the lady said, and a moment later, Jack could hear the sound of a person tapping the keys of a keyboard. Jack didn't have to wait for long as the lady spoke again. I'm sorry sir, but pilot Gabriel Wadi has already been booked for tomorrow. He will only be available next week. Can you choose another person, or may I recommend one to you? Jack frowned the moment that he heard this. He had been to Skyflight Charter's website and hadn't found anyone that impressed him as Gabriel. But now, he was going to fly another person's plane? No way, he had to get this person to be his personal pilot. At the thought of this, he said, no matter what the price, I want him to fly me tomorrow. Just name it. The lady seemed surprised by the fact that Jack wanted only this person to fly his aircraft. She thought to herself, what's the difference between pilot Gabriel and the other experienced pilots? There's even an experienced pilot than him that's available. Anyway, she didn't dare to say these words out loud as it may sound rude to a customer. In return, if the person filed a complaint about her, she surely would be punished by the upper management. Mr. Jack, you'll have to understand the situation. It's not that we don't want to have pilot Gabriel Wadi flying you, it's just that he was booked last month for tomorrow. So, it's impossible for us to cancel it. The lady said helplessly. Even Jack knew that it might not be possible for such a big helicopter charter company to cancel bookings that had been made by other customers. But, he was just too stubborn for this. Why don't you just change the pilot for the one that did a booking? There are other pilots that are free at the moment, right? Jack asked. The lady was really helpless here. So, she could only reply by saying, I'll have to consult my manager first. Please, don't hang up. Okay, Jack nodded and decided to wait for her to do the consultation. Chapter 59, Second System Mission. I'll have to consult my manager first. Please, don't hang up. Okay, Jack nodded and decided to wait for her to do the consultation. After about 3 minutes of waiting, the lady on the other end of the phone finally spoke. Well, Mr. Jack. I guess you have great luck, as the one that had booked pilot Gabriel Wadi has just said that the trip has been cancelled. So, pilot Gabriel Wadi is available now. Jack couldn't help but be suspicious. He wondered if it was true that the person had cancelled the order, or it was just that a certain pot-bellied manager had heard that there was extra money somewhere and decided to change the pilot for the other person. Anyway, he didn't care as long as he got what he wanted. He smiled and asked, so, how much am I supposed to pay to hire him for a whole year? The lady was immediately stunned by Jack's question. Hiring a pilot for a whole year? Wasn't that insanely expensive? Furthermore, the other party seemed serious and at the same time joking. After thinking for a moment, the lady related Jack to being a young man that was just trying to tease her. So, she could only ask for confirmation. Are you serious, sir? Of course I'm. How else would I call if I wasn't serious about it? Jack asked back with raised brows. The lady sensed the seriousness in Jack's voice and couldn't help but take a deep breath. Then, she replied, the pilot is paid according to the number of times that he will have to fly the aircraft. Furthermore, there's a guaranteed payment that has to be made. This is the one that if you hire a pilot for a long period of time, even if he doesn't fly you anywhere, he has to receive it. Jack nodded in understanding. After all, If he took the other party in for a whole year and only flied the aircraft once, he surely would be a joker. Furthermore, the longer that the pilot stayed with him, the more the chances that he would be missing if there were others that wanted to book him. This was the exact reason for the guaranteed payment. Not a problem at all. Just tell me the price and I will sign the contract after we come to an agreement. Jack replied. Okay then. The pilot is paid according to the distance that he's going to fly the aircraft. Then, there's also the duration of which he's hired. The payment has to be made in advance. In case you want to withdraw, the advance payment would be refunded after subtracting the payment of the period of time that the pilot has been on duty. As for the total remainder of the balance, the refund will be 20% less. The lady stated. Jack could also understand what this implied, being refunded 20% less of the money that he'd paid previously. After all, if he made an appointment that they would have a trip in 3 days, the schedule of the pilot on that specific day would be filled up. So, if there was a person that wanted to get him, he wouldn't be able to as long as it was on that day. In other words, as long as booking was done, it would make the person stop receiving the other offers. In the end, if the one that did the booking decided to cancel it, the pilot would have lost a lot. 15% of the 20% was the one that was given to the pilot as compensation, while the other 5% was for the organization. I want him to be my pilot for a year. As for the number of times that he would be flying the aircraft, just assume that it's 10 days every month with the longest distance. So, can you calculate for me what the price is? Jack said. The lady on the other side typed on the computer's keyboard for a while before replying. For a year of hire, you'll have to pay $72 million in advance. On the other hand, I'll assume the 10 longest flight a month would be within the country. So, for each flight, it will cost $300,000. The total cost should be $1.152 billion. Of course, once you pay this, the service and fuel of the aircraft would be on us. The lady's calculations were quite precise. Jack could understand that the reason for the high price was definitely for the fuel and service. After all, an aircraft's fuel wasn't like that of cars that could be easily accessed. This fuel was restricted, and as a result, for a person to get access to it, he must be authorized by the government officials, as it was the country's government that controlled the flow of this fuel. No problem at all. Just send me the contract via the email and I will sign it immediately. I'll transfer the money immediately after we sign the contract. Jack said. The lady never thought that Jack was such a rich person. She had thought that he would try reducing the period that he would be hiring the pilot. In the end, Jack was pretty serious about it and even agreed to complete the payment at this moment. Okay then. Send me your details through your email. I'll send you a text of the email that you're supposed to send your details to, after the call. The lady said enthusiastically. She was one of the people that offered online services. Although there were several that did it personally, there were those that operated through calls or online in the website. She was amongst them. Since Jack had placed such a big order, once it was completed, her commission this time would surely be high. So, the moment that the call ended, she sent over the email that Jack had to send his details to so that the contract could be drafted. After receiving the message, Jack immediately entered the mailbox present on his phone. He uploaded the scanned copies of his identity card and a few other required documents. After that, he decided to wait for them to draft the contract for him. As for the money, he could just transfer it via his phone, a privilege of his current black gold card. He was just thinking of leaving to get a printer and so on when his phone rang. On the screen, it was an unfamiliar number that Jack didn't know. He then wondered to himself, what's up with these calls today? So many calls. He wondered if the person calling him was a delivery person who had come to deliver his laptop. Looking at the time on the wristwatch, he found that it was only 2:55 in the afternoon. Jack simply shook his head as he thought that it would be impossible for the delivery to be done at this time, as they said that it would be delivered in the evening. After hesitating for a moment, he received the call. Hello, who's this? Jack, where exactly in Inchoate City are you right now? A familiar but somehow unfamiliar voice reached Jack's ears. Jack frowned when he heard how rude the other party was. Not only had he not even greeted him nor had he introduced himself, he went straight to asking for his location. Even if Jack was a retard, why would he give his location to a stranger? Of course he wouldn't do that. So, he coldly asked again, "Who are you? And why do you want to know of my location?" Jack's question seemed to have stunned the other party as there was absolutely no reply for almost a minute. Just when he was about to hang up, the other party finally replied, "I'm your father." "Then I'm your grandpa. How dare you just come from nowhere and claim to be my father?" Jack was furious at this moment at the mention of the word father and couldn't help but curse at the other party. Father was the word that he had never liked to hear ever since he was at the Alfonso family, and this hadn't changed even at this moment. After all, he and his mother had gone through a lot, and as a result, he hated the fact that his father never cared about him and his mother. His mother always secretly shed her tears as she looked at a photo of her and the person that was supposedly to be his father. From that moment, he hated the person who dared to claim to be his father. As such, he hated the word father as long as it was related to him. So, the moment that he heard the other party claiming to be his father, his always suppressed anger and resentment burst out all at once. He threw several profanities that he had never done before at this moment, all of it just to vent his anger. After cursing for almost 10 minutes, it was at this time that his head cooled down for a moment. It was also now that the words that the other party said finally sank into his brain and were processed. Jack had never expected that the reason as to why he found the voice familiar was due to the fact that the other party was his father. "Father?" Jack muttered to himself at this moment, his eyes gazed at the void as he was in a daze. Just as Jack's mind was about to wander around, Angel, the systems guide, spoke, accompanied by a system prompt. "Emergency mission program activated. Advance reward, professional combatant. Accompanying task that you'll have to complete so that you can permanently have the reward is as follows. Task: earn money by participating and winning a fighting competition. Time limit: 7 days. Chapter 60, Great Improvement. Emergency mission program activated. Advance reward, professional combatant. Accompanying task that you'll have to complete so that you can permanently have the reward is as follows. Task: earn money by participating and winning a fighting competition. Time limit: 7 days. Jack was surprised by the system. What the heck with the mission? Although he liked having even more skills that were offered by the system, he really was stunned by the fact that the system just offered him an ability or skill, without even there being some trigger. If he remembered everything well, the time that he was offered the professional driving skill, it was a moment that, if he didn't even know how to drive the car that he'd bought, he surely was going to get embarrassed. In such a situation, the emergency mission program was activated and he was given the skill that allowed him to not embarrass himself. Now, he was being offered the professional combatant skill or ability? He wondered if he was in danger or if he was supposed to fight someone. But, according to how things were, since he was inside his own mansion and there were several guards, it meant that he was supposed to be safe as long as a person with a gun didn't show up. System, what's up with this mission? Jack took a deep breath before asking. He was quite tensed at this moment as he felt some kind of premonition. It was as if there was some kind of danger that was looming around him. The system can see what the host needs at a specific time. So, it offers what is needed at the right moment. Since the emergency program has been activated, then it implies that there is a risk of someone beating you up or forcing you to do something. Since that is the case, you should accept the mission as soon as possible, or you might as well look for other countermeasures. Upon hearing the system's reply, Jack was now sure that there was something wrong. After all, according to the introduction about the system, it was one that came out of the blue planet. In other words, it was an alien. But all the same, it was useful. It had already proven its abilities by multiplying his income by 100 times or giving him several rewards after he received his first income. With its ability to make the guards ignore the presence of the Eurocopter that wasn't there previously was already a show of its strength. Now that it had stated that he was in some kind of danger, he immediately decided to take action by accepting the mission. "I accept the mission," Jack stated. Mission accepted. Advance mission reward granted. Task: earn money by participating and winning a fighting competition. Time limit: 7 days. Failure to complete the task would lead to the host losing the ability as well as receiving the system's punishment. Till this moment, Jack wasn't sure what type of punishment the system administered to a person if he failed to complete the task on time. But he wasn't interested to test it on himself. Furthermore, he wasn't willing to lose the reward that he'd just received. Just as he was about to get immersed in his thoughts, he was forced out of that state by the warm current that ran through his body. Followed by that, some unfamiliar memories entered his mind and merged with his current ones. At this moment, he felt that his body contained unimaginable strength. He felt that he could shatter a wall with a single punch. But all of this was an illusion as he hadn't tested the limit of his strength yet. After a moment, he felt that there was something in his right hand. Looking at it, he found that he still had his phone. And the call was still ongoing, and at the same time, there was a male voice coming through. "Jack, are you there? This is an emergency. Tell me where you're right now," Dalton yelled. He had been trying to talk to him and ask for his current location, but at the end of it all, Jack didn't reply to any of his questions since he stopped cursing him. Jack got irritated by the other party's commanding tone. "Who are you trying to command? Do you even know me? You better get lost at this moment." As these thoughts passed through his mind, he hung up the call. There was nothing that could be spoken between the two of them as they were no different from strangers. After that, he immediately added this contact to the blacklist. After all, he didn't want someone to disturb his current life. After that, he began thinking of how things were. The system had given an emergency mission. On the other hand, Dalton was asking for his location. This implied that there was no coincidence at all. It implied that the danger that was coming was obviously related to Alfonso family in one way or the other. He sighed before going to the basement where there was a gym. Whirl! 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 At this time inside a helicopter, Dalton's face darkened the moment that Jack hung up on him. He tried calling once again but found that he was blocked. He took a deep breath before turning to Steve as he asked, "Have they tracked his location?" Dalton wasn't an idiot. He knew that since Jack left the mansion on his own and was later informed that he had been expelled from the family, it was obvious that he wouldn't agree to go back with him. So, he decided to track his location during the call. But of course, the one that was tracking his location wasn't on the helicopter with them. Instead, he was back at the mansion. So, he had Steve call that hacker while he called Jack. The good thing was the fact that, although Jack had at a point stopped talking, he hadn't hung up yet. In other words, the duration should be enough for the hacker to get Jack's current location via the call. Why, yes. But I'm not sure if the location that has been stated is the real one, Steve stammered the moment that Dalton asked. Although he was quite angry at the fact that his useless half-sibling was the one that had been selected, he knew that he would have to give in at the moment. But the reason for stammering wasn't because he was afraid of Jack's counterattack. Not at all. It was absolutely something different. "What's wrong with the location?" Upon seeing Steve's expression, Dalton frowned as he asked. "And not at all. It's just that the location doesn't seem like somewhere that Jack should be at," Steve replied. "Let me see." Dalton frown deepened as he took the phone from Steve's hand. He looked at the location that had been sent over to them. There was a statement first: Inchoate City, Wind Hill Residential Area, Prince and Princess Palace. Immediately below that was an attached screenshot of the locator. It showed that the call came from one of the two mansions. When Dalton saw this, he immediately frowned even more. Just like Steve, he didn't think that Jack could afford to live in such a place. After all, although they were not living in Inchoate City, as a neighboring city, they could easily get the information about this special palace. After thinking things through, he gave the pilot the location and asked him to fly over there. He had to get Jack back to Crystal City at all costs. If he failed, not only would the opportunity to have his family rise disappear, it might as well invite a calamity. Furthermore, there was still his father who would surely not let him go. After all, he made the decision behind his father's back. Jack didn't know that his current location was already exposed. Otherwise, he would have surely gotten out of the mansion to welcome them warmly. Anyway, currently, he was busy trying his strength inside the gym. The results were mind-blowing. Not only had his strength greatly increased, even his speed as well as reaction speed increased. The control of his own body had also heightened in such a way that there were no wasteful movements. His strength, speed, reaction speed as well as other parameters that were related to his body were 5 times that of a healthy adult man. In other words, if an adult's strength was about 100 kilograms, his was 500. There was no need to talk about speed and whatever. After all, the improvement that Jack had just experienced wasn't like 1 + 4 = 5. No, this was more than that. If he threw a punch, instead of it weighing 100 kilograms, it would be 500 kilograms. It was completely opposite of the 100 kilograms punches hitting a person 5 times. After testing his strength, Jack immediately went back to the living room. He found that there was a missed call there. Upon checking it, he found that it was from the charter organization. He also saw that he still had one unread mail. So, he guessed that this was the contract that had been sent by the lady that was on charge of helping him. He clicked onto the mail and opened it. But just before he could start reading it, he heard a shout coming from outside his mansion. "I'm sorry, sir, but you cannot get in there without permission." "What do you mean that I cannot enter? My son is here. Are you trying to say that I can't see him?"